Let's see. Are we on Zoom? We're on Zoom or whatever. Okay. All right. Then
Is anybody listening in?
Analysts.
Oh, Mr.
Rich.
Wilson.
Rich, who was missed at this meeting, he has things he needs to attend to with the silo. All right, we'll call this meeting to order of the Hopkinton Budget Committee. I guess we do the pledge. Somebody want to lead us?
Where's the flag?
I don't see it. It's in here.
There.
Ken, you want to do it?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, Jonathan,
Yes, sir.
if you want to let Rich in as a a participating member, we'd have to vote to allow him for that.
He had told me he wasn't going to attend, so I'm not sure. So I don't see him. We don't see that anymore. I was going to say Rich could raise his hand if he wants us to do that.
I think you probably have to like be active on the.
Right.
I'm going to ask, Rich, can you hear us?
He can't talk.
He raised his hand. Okay. So we have to make a motion and a vote on that, Ken? You said?
Yeah.
Okay. So I see,
Across the ether.
Mr. Reddy's made a motion. Anyone want to second that? Okay. We have a second. So this is a motion to allow Rich to participate remotely. Any discussion of that? No? All in favor? Aye.
Well, first, because somebody's participating remotely, we have to do all the votes by roll call.
Including this one?
All right.
We probably don't have much to vote.
Going by individual vote, we'll start with
Aye.
Freddie.
Yes.
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 We're doing- All right. Seems like that motion carries. So then do we have to do something to move him in so that he can have audio here? Allowed to talk.
Yeah.
All right. Hello, Rich.
Rich, you can unmute.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
You are with us.
Thank you. I was having a hard time figuring out the buttons on this phone.
Well, you did it better than me. So glad to have you.
But I'll probably have to mute it because I'm milking and it's pretty noisy in there.
That's what we're doing here. All right, fair enough. Moving on to approval of the September 13th minutes.
I'll move in.
Ken says he moves them in. Somebody want a second?
Second.
Second from Deb. Any discussions, revisions? Anyone? Hearing none, we can put it to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to abstain. Roll call every vote now. Okay. Starting with Steve.
Abstain, I was absent. I abstain.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to abstain as well.
Yes. Yes.
Rich? Looks like he's muted, so he's milking. Is that enough to carry that? Oh, that's a yes.
That's enough.
All right, minutes are in. On to Ken for the town budget.
Okay, everybody should have received in the email packet, the summary revenue and expense for the year to date, and remembering that the select board year starts January 1, we're now 75% of the way through the year. In terms of revenues, overall, it's looking good. There's a number of things might look questionable, but they're simply timing, like the state paying rooms and meals tax at the end of the year. One item that I had expressed some concern about at our last meeting was that in August, the motor vehicle fees had dropped in that month, and I didn't know if that was creating a trend, but they came back up in September, and they're looking like they're again slightly higher than budget for the year. So overall, I'd say revenues are looking good. Last month, I pointed out that there was a misclassification of a $60,000+ payment from Webster. It was booked to Webster ambulance share. It should have been booked to Webster landfill reimbursement. And when that adjustment is taken into account, those two accounts, look like they're staying in line with budget projections. So are there any questions on revenue?
And you probably spoke about this last time, so forgive me. The on line 3502, interest on investments. The nature of the year-to-date interest being so much higher than budget.
That thanks to Neil and Kelly, we're getting roughly 5% interest rate. And we had, had the proceeds of the road bond, $2 million, so we're getting 5% interest on that. And we're not going to be able to use those proceeds for the Briarville until next spring. So it's thanks to the higher interest rate.
Do you have a sense of how much of that is from the road bond, which is essentially we're paying interest on that, we're receiving interest, we're paying interest because we're not at a time, versus how much is based on getting higher interest rate on other cash? I guess most of it from the road bond, mostly surplus or.
In terms of, Kelly, could you help me in terms of cash balance in that account is? What would it be?
Cash balance moved little by little just to get all of that set. So it was just over the road bond amount as and I think it was 17,000 interest that we got. So at least half of that would have been from the road.
Okay, thanks.
For the month.
And what's very good is that we're getting 5% interest and the bond is at slightly under 4%.
Just idle curiosity on the second to last, the 3508, what's contributions and donations of $1,000? Is that somebody just giving? What is that line?
That was the estimate.
Estimated, sorry.
Yeah, the 1,000 was the budgeted amount. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, if it's just some generous individual or why.
Okay.
I have a similar kind of question. What is yield taxes? 3185.
That we
That's the timber tax.
Okay.
for cutting. And that can really vary dramatically from year to
Year to year. That's what I was thinking.
Anything else on revenues? Okay, running to expenses, again, say that we're looking, good compared to budget. In terms of things to point out, beside timing for 4195 cemeteries, that looks high, and that's because at the end of the year, the cemetery fund will reimburse the town for it, so it'll be back to just basically the 100% budget. Solid waste cleanup 4325 is timing. An interesting one is 4445 vendor payments that relates to assistance with housing, utilities, or whatever. And that's running low, and what we're speculating is because low-income people have been forced out of town because of the high prices for rentals. And the debt service principal and interest, that's all already done for the year. So again, I guess I'll just ask for any questions.
Not specifically in this, but as far as like the upcoming budget, you're in the process right now of getting information from department heads,
Yes, and in the packet for the last meeting, you would have received this schedule of how we'd be proceeding, and nothing has come to the select board yet. The initial budget presentation is Wednesday, November 1. Oh, that's not the presentation, that's the initial budget goes to the select board on Wednesday, November 1. And Monday, November 6th is when we start getting presentations. Gladly turn it back to you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Ken. So I don't see Dawn. So why don't we turn it over to Vicky for the Hopkinton Village? Thank you. More than this. That's 6:30.
So reading a profit and loss statement is awkward. And last time I was interested in why the village water precinct's net income was $53,000 and the red is now 86. So I have not had a chance to actually confer with the treasurer. She just sent this to me today. But my understanding is that our system upgrade went over budget, as we know, because we asked for a $50,000 bond to replenish the coffers because of the system upgrade. We've since switched water system operators, and I believe paid what was owed to the people that did the original system upgrade, and we parted ways badly. So that's where we're at. If you can see cash down at the bottom of page 1, cash at 9/30 is $41,000. So it's a good thing we took out a $50,000 loan. And then the precinct is the second page, which is much, it's all small potatoes, but it's smaller potatoes. We had a fun back and forth with the DRA, just as a note, because our annual meeting minutes were written incorrectly and they could not accept them, so they couldn't set our tax rate. And so we just sent them on September 22nd with the corrected annual minutes because we couldn't get a quorum all summer. So it should be resolved now. She wrote back and said, thank you very much. So I'm sorry that I don't have a lot of details except what I've shared, but if you have any questions, I'll take them back to my people next week and come back with more information.
Anyone have any questions?
And just as a reminder, the system upgrade was increasing the storage tanks, that's at this end of Briarhead Road. That's been years in the making. Increased it from, I believe, 3,600 gallons to 30,000 gallons. per the Department of Environmental Services.
So is that done now?
It's done. It was
Okay.
just quibbling over the final bill.
Okay,
Yeah.
with the old operator.
That's right.
And so now there's a new operator.
There is.
Okay,
And they seem
better.
Great. Any other questions for Vicky?
I have no idea. You mean the water prices. I can check in with my colleagues at our meeting on Thursday, because honestly, I don't know.
Thank you, Vicky. So let's move on to Rob.
Okay, so two documents. The first one got the last time, that's MS 25, which is sort of a synopsis. It's the mini version of our annual audit that goes to the state. So at that point in time, people have had time or interest in going through it, but if we want to sort of walk through some of the terminology and language, we got a bunch of highlights, but that is not of great interest, and we don't need to do that, but I think it's probably good. So I'm just going to go page by page, just so people understand where we're at. So on the first page under current assets, I mean, some of this is obvious, so
Pause for just.
Yeah.
On our screen, it's,
You have to turn on.
Yes.
Oh.
so I just want to see if I.
I printed it out, it makes
You can download it and then open the download
Oh, there you go. Smart, Krista.
and you should be able to rotate the pages in the downloaded version.
Ooh.
Rob, I'd just like to,
This thing,
Rob, I'd just like to say that on the Hopkinton School District memorandum that was to Mike Flynn and the school board from Michelle. I just found that, I like that.
On the cover sheet of the financial statement.
Just the way she stated it, she's, the general fund related, she's highlighted some of that information, the food service related. I just think that's really well done and easy for us to see. I appreciate her work.
Yeah, you can, looks like you can rotate.
oh, there we go, yes. So, yeah. Right. See it, not the button right there.
Looks like you gotta go a few times to get.
Yeah.
To come.
Yeah.
Oh, right, yeah.
Got it, great. Thank everybody for this teamwork and getting this far.
Right. Wow. Okay, so that's.
Yes.
Are we ready now? Yeah. Okay,
So
so
do this one.
the current assets part, terms that, I just went through this with Michelle from my own understanding, so I will share that with you. The interfund receivables, that's money from the state and federal government grants. The intergovernment receivable is from the town, the state, and the federal government. So this is line 4 to 5. And then the other receivables, that's things like preschool tuition. So that's money that we get locally. And that'll come up as sort of important later on. We'll go through the monthly plan. The rest of that assets part is fairly self-explanatory. Under current liabilities, the interfund payable. So we have lots of different funds that we pay our bills out of. So that's when Michelle needs to transfer from special ed to regular ed. And those kinds. Other payables is referring to bills that we received and paid for after June 30th. So because of when our financial year begins, he needs to account for it that way. The accrued expenses, that's a reference again to payroll, and it also has to do with payroll that gets paid prior to June 30th, but is going to be applied to after July 1st. So again, just more sort of accounting things. And then the deferred revenues, so under general, $1,300, that would be like the booster club. And then the food service one, this would be My School Bucks, which is how kids now pay for their lunches through that credit system. And then this one sort of blew me away because this is other grants and donations. So it's like the Hopkinton Foundation. There's a lot of money that's being donated to Hopkinton schools. Thank you very, very much. So that's where those references fall. When we move down, just stop me if there's a question. When we move down to the next part, fund equity, the reserve for prepaid expenses. So these are things that we paid prior to July 1st, but for the following year. So because of the way invoices come in, they didn't technically fall into last year's accounting, but they will move. On line 31, reserve for encumbrances non-lapsing. If you remember from last year, that's a reference to the New Hampshire retirement that we got that one-time money from the state. And then the unassigned fund balance, that is our article. Sits. There it is. Under that, in the reserve for special purposes. So, you know, we often talk about these various accounts. So the food service fund balance will come up throughout the year through the budgeting process. So you remember the first year, 2 years ago, we put in 75,000, and then last year's budget we put in 150,000. And I'm pretty sure last time we were here, we had a banner year last year. We had sales kick up almost 100 grand, and then we also got a lot of money from the state. So we actually have a surplus in food service, and that's the surplus in food service.
$1 million?
81,057.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was looking at the wrong
I'm
column.
looking at the
Okay.
vertical column, so column 2 is
Yeah.
food service.
That makes more sense. Thank you.
The capital projects number, the
Good cookies.
262,704.
It's what I picked out.
Yeah, that was
Oh.
really big. I'm gonna
Good cook.
go into business with you, right? That's right. The 262,704 was money that had been spent but not yet billed for the building projects. And then the last piece, the trust and agencies, that's all of our trust funds, with the exception of Article. So you took our special ed trust and CIP and all of those things, that's where that comes from. That's page 1. Reminded why I'm not. Sheldon reminded me that. On page 2, we actually found a little hiccup in our MS-25. So the transportation fees for all sources, the 93,000, that's actually tuition. So, you know, we talk about students wanting to come, and we're seeing a little bit more regularity with that, where folks from outside of town are coming to us and wanting to send their children. So that's going to get adjusted. That should have been in line too. The other revenue from local sources, line 6. So under the general fund, which is the first column, that's things like E-rate, which is the rebates that we get back from various services, rentals, textbooks, etc. Food service, that's a reference to sales. And then in the middle column, the other, that's grants. So non-state, federal, again, Hopkins Public Schools, PTA, robotics. A lot of folks supporting our school system. On the left-hand side, number 10, statewide enhanced education tax, that's swept. And then underneath that is again a reference to that adjusted New Hampshire retirement. Line 17, I had to ask because I didn't know what catastrophic aid is, but that's how they categorize special ed. Probably something that should be done. And I think that's it, that page. On the third page, we've got restricted grants and aid from federal government through the state on line 26. So in the general fund, the 112, that's a reference to Medicaid. The 120 would be money we received from the federal government for breakfast and lunch. And then the big number, the 604, 532, That's all of the grants, Title 1, 2, 4, IDA, preschool, safe schools, you name it, that's all those grants that fall into that bucket.
Rob, if I could ask,
Yeah.
in general, the money for lunches that you get from federal or state, is that for all students or just for needy ones?
So. Awesome. Okay. So the money that we get from the federal government is tiered. So students who receive free lunch, for breakfast, for instance, $2.26. Reduced lunch, we get $1.56. Paid breakfast, we get 50 cents. For lunch, it's $3.56. Reduced food 16, and then some odd reason 8 cents for paid lunches. And it's the same on the state side, but different small. So you get fractions, but larger.
And during the pandemic, lunches were free for all students. And does the federal government still provide that kind of an option?
You mean for all students?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware of. There are school districts where, higher need, their free and reduced lunch population is significantly higher than ours. But, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The last part here, I think we're on page 3 now, transfer from general fund. So again, this is movement of money to various places. So the one in other, the 46,994, that was for 2 things. That was for the artisan residence program, but most of it was our share of the sabbatical that was teacher had last year. So sabbaticals reduced. They often receive it from a foundation, but we are also usually the health benefits. And then the 525 was our warrant articles from town meetings. So tech trust, benefit trust, special education, yeah. On the very last page, the facility acquisition and construction on line 19. So above that, sorry, all of our general categories, and like when we talked about forecasting, this is where I'd like to track the last 10 years for instruction, support services, those items to sort of see where the peaks and valleys are. That's my homework. Underneath that, under other outlays, we've got facility acquisition and construction, 101,000. That was a carpet project that took place. And then 226, that was the building maintenance activities that took place, wrapping up the building project, the infamous call wall that we now no longer have to talk about, thank God. And let's see. The transfer to other special revenue funds, the 46,994, that's also that sabbatical that we talked about. It's just placed in another place, more account. I think that pretty much wraps up the things that I thought stood out as meeting explanation. The full audit will be out usually in November. So we've got available. Any questions about? All right, so the monthly financials. Yes, Michelle does the cover sheet for us to sort of like point out major changes. I asked Michelle to sort of walk me through this document because even though I've been doing this for a little while, I haven't been doing this with you folks. So we'll just kind of do the same format and go page by page and get what I think are highlights that people might have done.
Which one are you looking at, Mr. Neal?
So I'm looking at the August financial statement,
Okay.
page 1 under general fund. You slide all the way over to the right-hand column, 8/31/2023, the 1.6 million.
Mm-hmm.
That would be income that we've received thus far. The 787, now it says fund balance June 30th. So this is not a fund balance where we're sitting right now in the present year. This is all of last year's reserve for encumbrances. She's wrapping up the budget, plus the end of the year fund balance for things to reduce taxes. So 400,000 that we were going to take out of Article 10, we ended up not doing, we transferred. And then the $150,000 that we said we were going to use out of fund balance. So those two things, plus the encumbrances, equals that. The income not yet received, that's taxes, state tuition, does not include grants or fees. Let's see. Total expenses, so far, out of that 22 million, we've spent 1.7. Encumbered is about $20 million. And then additional expenses. But this is things that are budgeted for, but they haven't been encumbered yet. So this would be things like food service, any open positions, those elements. Anticipated fund balance, $89,000. Michelle was really clear in our finance committee meeting that we really shouldn't pay much attention to this until January. It's just, we're just way too early in the game to predict much of anything. In the food service category, you've got their fund balance of $81,000 that we already talked about. Additional income not yet received, so where the projection is between sales, the federal government and the state, we would get $460,000. And she's anticipating a deficit of $5,646. But keep in mind, she has not encumbered $150,000 from that budget. She doesn't want to move that over yet. So yeah. On the next page in the balance sheet. So, you know, cash in the bank, 1.4. And I did ask Michelle because your comment about putting money in high interest CDs are 5%. So it's curious when I see $1.4 million in a checking account. And if you track it for a year, it's generally about that number, but there were a couple of times where it dipped down to, in January last year, it dipped down about 400,000. So for security's sake, you have to have about a month of what your expected outlays are. So we're going to explore that a little bit more and see if there's some way that we can transfer some money into something high yield to get a little bit more interest on it.
Just on that, I believe, Kelly can tell me if I'm wrong, that we're getting 5% on basically checking account. Not yes.
No, so that is different. It's like an investment account. Our checking account is a much lower interest rate, and we would have to keep cash flow in there.
But you can probably have like a certain number of withdrawals a month. Is that true, or?
You can, the hard part gets to be the juggling back and forth. So you would need somebody to do those transfers and then approve them. So with multiple steps, it's very hard to access that quickly, especially when you're doing checks weekly. You kind of need to have some cash flow to be able to just operate.
So something we're exploring because, you know, we're trying to leverage everything we can to increase our revenue and hopefully reduce tax rates. Found it interesting that the dues checking account. So that goes, money from that comes from revenue from tuition, again, E-rate, student activity. There are things that we cannot pay for with taxpayer dollars. So our dues to New Hampshire School Board Association, for instance, need to be paid from that account, not from an account that is created by revenue fund. The other receivables account is, again, example would be preschool tuition. And then the last one that stood out is, what is that? It's the miscellaneous. Whenever I see miscellaneous, I always have to ask. That's our workman's comp. And the flex healthcare down the bottom is the FSA balance sheet. So I didn't realize this, but if you have an FSA and you don't use it all, it's retained by the school. Sort of a interesting dynamic, but I guess that's the function of pre-tax dollars. And, oh, I'm sorry, at the top, the due to other funds piece, the 240, that would be grants and donations, food service and travel. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around the dynamics of a lot of these little elements. The next page, the next balance sheet. Right. Michelle tried to explain a couple of these to me like 6 times, like expenditure budget control and revenue budget control. Still not quite sure what she's saying. She tells me it's accounting practice. I'm going to take her at her. But encumbrances control, those should always match. 16 million, that would be the money that is to be raised by taxes. 785 is Article 10. The expenditure control and the revenue budget control, as the year goes on, those numbers will equalize. They will look similar to each other. And then the last one, different unreserved fund balance accounting. So this goes back to what we mentioned in the MS-25, last year's reserves for encumbrances, in our end of year fund balance reduced tax rate. And now to just the things that are kind of jumping out at you in terms of expense and revenue and the final sheets. If you look at, there are two. The vocational education piece, where this is, this is 1,300. So we're down a little bit. And the reason for that is we have more kids going to the VOC, and Michelle is also forecasting that we will receive less money from the state to offset transportation costs. So that's a good thing, and it's budgetary wise a little bit difficult, but it'll help us for this year in our budget. And then down under special ed transportation line 2722. That is the world of special ed, where transportation costs related to replacement that we don't always are able to foresee. And then on the last page, total 10 general funds, and you guys probably know this better than I, but I'm just hitting highlights here. 1,756,000 is what we spent so far. Again, that 20 million is what's been encumbered. And then the 1,980,000 not yet encumbered, but budgeted and expected to happen, but not yet. And that are those two documents. Anybody has any questions?
Where are we at with staff, and do we still have positions?
We have a few open IA positions, but other than that, we are fully staffed.
Any idea how much staff?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but if you remember, last year we showed a balance sheet, for lack of a better word, like hiring practice.
Yeah.
Who went out, who came in. Should be ready to share that with you next time. Talked to Mike about it today, actually, and it was positive. It wasn't as positive as we would have liked because we had some folks leave very late in the year, June. So to replace them, pretty difficult. So we ended up having to hire up the salary scale. So we did hire a lot of really good teachers that early in their careers.
Then in the upper grades, obviously all the buzz is the large contingent of foreign exchange students. How does that work? Is it a wash because then we send people back, or do they actually pay a fee to come?
No, that's been going on for years. So I think there's about 35 French exchange students here right now, and our kids went there last spring. So the nice part for them is they've already made those relationships, and they're excited to see them come back. Definitely changes the dynamic in the school. And there's more stage, lots of activity, lots of buzz.
Zero budget just.
Yeah.
something that- Right, just a swap for a swap, a kid for a kid.
The kids pay to go to France and these guys pay. But it's doesn't, there's no cost to the school. Great program. And that happens in Germany. I don't think there's a Spanish exchange. And just, we have our first, well, our only budget work session next week. You heard our school meeting last night, Mike, and we've been talking about this for a while, that the expectation or the goal was to come in low to flat in terms of, department budgets, department head budgets. So we'll see how well they were able to manage that. And then we'll go from there. That'll all be next week. Big spreadsheets. That was a lot. I apologize.
What did, like class size compared to anticipated and?
Things are pretty much where we thought they were gonna be. There's one less class down at our Martin School, due to class size. So one less teacher spot there. And again, it came up last night, so it's appropriate to bring it here. There was an anticipated assistant BA's position that was posted, and we voted last night to make it posting. Michelle has told us that she's on a 2-year roll to retirement. So Mike feels strongly, and Finance Committee certainly supports it, and the board supports that we bring somebody in next year to spend a year learning our systems and go through it from wrapping up books, coming in July 1, so we're wrapping up the books for the audit, going through the budget process, going through a contract negotiation with HEA, going through school district meeting, and then again, process running to the end. So hopefully we can find that person, and there should not be, as Mike explained last night, there should not be an impact because we have that salary line in that teacher position that we can slide over to take care of this 1-year assistant BA.
Did you say replace Michelle?
Yes.
He's moving on to other things.
Oh, boy.
I remember last year when we were going through the budget process, particularly at the end, there was some resolving differences between what the budget committee and the school board had been proposing. There's a lot of discussion about class sizes. And the school board was going to be looking at its class size policy. I think something happened there, and I guess I was wondering if you could update us on what's transpired there, and like what if any practical effects.
Sure. So don't hold me to the numbers because my memory's not that good, but there are distinct class sizes for kindergarten, then 1 through 3, 4 through 6, and then the middle high school is really programmatic. So class size is less of an issue there because we're running courses to our program of studies. But the immediate change was that we could articulate why we were having a second grade teacher this year. And instead of it becoming emotional, as it often did, it was just able to say, this is what we agreed, the number that we can provide excellent education. So hopefully that'll help us continue to forecast a little bit as numbers come in. As a side note, as part of our joint meeting last night, the housing committee, is that what it's called? Looking at different ways to expand housing in Hopkinton and dense versus single family. And my thought, budgetarily, this is switching. I'm no longer representing school board, speaking for myself, but dense housing needs to be also thought about in terms of how many units, how many families, how many kids. Say a developer comes in and they want to do 100 unit, well, then you need to think about doing that in a way that also provides for more space in schools. Perhaps that would be a big impact.
Is that on the table?
I don't think anything's on the table with that.
Yeah,
I'm hearing what I'm hearing. They're in discussion phase.
Yeah, the housing committee is gathering input.
yeah.
That's as far as it's gone. Really. They're having public meetings, a number of them. They've had some, they were more scheduled. I don't have the schedule for that, but I believe that a lot of people have been coming and providing their thoughts.
Just to follow up on from last year, so my recollection is that Mike wants to have kind of, these are the numbers, and we're gonna for each class, and then we're just gonna make, you know, that's gonna be predictable, make it more predictable. And there was some discussion about, well, how do we determine those numbers, like what the class size is gonna be? And I know, having gone to some of those school board meetings, there was discussion about, well, we're comparable with, we've looked at some other school districts. And I know I was curious to know if we also looked at, in terms of, you know, does that take into consideration kids that have greater need, that need more attention compared to those other districts as well?
Yeah.
So that there's, you know, because 20 kids in a class is not necessarily the same as 20 kids in a class, depending on how much attention each student needs. So I'm curious
Yeah,
if that was
sure
looked
when
at,
that
or
work was being done, we were looking at very similar demographics. And we're gonna compare ourselves to Bow and Kearsarge. We're not gonna compare ourselves to Manchester or Nashua. Those would not be fair.
for that reason.
For that reason, that it's higher needs, ELL students, I mean, higher amounts of special ed students, you know, those percentages are all. So, yeah, we looked at similar, as well as, you know, like, yeah, speaking for myself now. The interesting thing about looking at class size is most of that is done when you reduce. There's not been a lot of research necessarily that's been done in terms of going low. So, you understand what I'm saying? Like, the benefits of going from 32 to 24 is clearly articulated, and it's definitely there. But there hasn't been a lot of research that says what happens when you go from 16 to. So then we think about best practice. Not only what other communities are doing, but the feedback we get from people who do this every day. My personal experience in the high school environment, there's a big difference between a class of 23 and 25 kids, and not a big difference between 14 and 19, but 23 and 29 has become very respect for all kinds of reasons. That's not scientific, I don't think. You can ask pretty much every teacher and they'll have that number.
Right, and I'm certainly not an educator, but you know, my thinking would be that in the earlier grades, it would be particularly impactful in terms of recognizing somebody who's trying to get their foundational skills down, and if they fall behind, then they, you know, so start so well later on.
Are lower than our ones. Maybe kindergarten one, quote me again, but they're definitely lower. When they first arrive, and we're assessing and figuring out where they're at, how to meet their needs, what programs need to be in place, supports, all of that stuff.
Thank you.
May I ask about lead remediation?
Do I guess?
Is
I
there,
don't know if we're gonna be able to give you an answer.
is there an idea of how much it's gonna cost to fix the lead issues at Harold Martin?
No, I can't answer that because I don't know.
Okay,
The last school board discussion we had about lead was that there were some concerns, but we were, in terms of the drinking stations, that we were still obviously well within acceptable ranges, and that they were, that I don't know.
I assume that we're working with a third-party vendor to test and remediate the lead,
Yeah,
and that they'll estimate how much it'll cost. And I guess you'll have to determine whether or not that's this budget cycle.
Right, right. I'll ask Jim Rizicki,
Mhm.
see where we're at, and Mike, and give you some, hear that next time.
Thank you.
That reminded me slightly, it would be good for the next time we meet to, know, like a kind of a small progress update sort of on, I remember a big topic of discussion last year was, the facilities director is going to need more grant applications and more areas to identify like cost savings and efficient spending and stuff like that. And it'd be good to just get like a quick update on his like focus areas, progress report, how that's going.
So again, I just wanna, we talked about this last time, so in terms of framing that conversation, I'm happy to bring the discussion about how it impacts financials
Yeah.
and what it brings. But like in terms of projects and all the rest of it, that's the school board. Right, so like what he's doing, that's a school board meeting, how it's saving money, that to me is a budget. Is that pretty accurate?
I thought we were gonna have a further discussion on that
I
tonight.
thought we were too. So I get, you know, it's clearly Jim is doing things and bringing in grant money, and it's been a banner success so far. In terms of a little bit extra that we had to pay to get someone of his quality and ability to do that task. But if we're gonna get into what projects we're gonna do and at what cost, that's a school board meeting. That's what I'm saying. In other words,
I guess my area of focus was the former. And not like versus the amount it costs to get him in. I'm just interested on what he's doing. How the grant applications are going and like where he's targeting efficiencies.
okay,
That said, I'm a little triggered by the second. Because I do think. While it is up to the school board to determine capital and Jim to determine capital improvement projects and the order and all of that. I think it is within the scope of the budget committee to know, like the forecast. I believe that we have reviewed.
yeah, and that would be in the CIP.
Right.
So that's definitely, yes.
Yeah, I'm certainly not gonna tell you, you should do the boiler and not the roof, but I'd like to know you're gonna do the roof this year and the boiler next year.
Yeah, and that's all laid out in
Yeah.
the CIP dates and what's forecasted and coded in terms of, you know, this needs to be done first, second, third, low priority, high priority.
Right.
And if you know, people want to take a look at that CIP in this form, we could certainly do that. I would probably ask Dulcie to come, or somebody from the CIP to go through it.
Yeah, I think at some point during our budget process, that would be helpful. So that, because the budget committee is asked to support or not support, you know, the budget and including elements that support capital improvement. So to build our understanding, just to update it annually, I think is a good idea.
And Rob, for your information on the town side, we do provide the CIP report and projections going out in 20 years.
I didn't mean to be curt. I hope it didn't come off that way. I'm learning my role here.
Not at all.
I do think that it's helpful for us just to have a sense of the value added from the position. Like, you know, as a committee, I mean, I think that's a helpful thing for us to understand. You know, if that's giving a shot in the arm to the revenue side, I think that's helpful for us to understand. And something that is good for the town and good for the school as well, so.
Is there any report to give on the lawsuit that's going on?
Sure, so there's the two lawsuits, Rand and then Conval, which we are a part of. Pretty much same place we were the last time we met. The judge is going to his findings on our case first. They are very different. So the Rand case is essentially, as you may or may not know, saying that going back to donors. So towns that have excess SWEP don't get to keep it. They need to turn it over to the state. It needs to be distributed. That's their case. So tax system. Our case is very specific to what amount of money is needed to provide an adequate education. And that dollar amount is a minimum, in the case was right around $10,000. So I can see why the judge might want to rule on ours first before talking about ours. But we have not heard anything more in terms of timeline when that will cross our.
Is the argument that it should be increased to a specific amount, or the lawyers are not specifically targeting an amount?
There were specific amounts talked about in trial days, yes.
Other questions? Great, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And Mark, did you sort out the
Is there a cord? Is there a cord we gotta plug into? Okay. Can I unplug the projector and plug it into my, no, that wouldn't, I mean, can I plug my computer into the projector? We would cut out Rich's view of us.
I don't think it'll.
Right.
Anything to the recording, I don't think it's fine. Plug it in.
Or we can just do it next month. Send out an advance.
Could you give us an overview of what
Sure.
your thoughts are?
Yeah, so, because I'm a geek sometimes,
how many pages?
it's just not printable.
Oh, not printable.
It's not,
Okay,
it's not
sorry.
printable because there's so much information.
Okay,
So in June, I was giving thought to questions that have come up in this committee and sometimes members of the public that I would say more or less are like, how are our town and school budgets tracking consumer price index, i.e. inflation or other benchmarks, and over time? We know that there's variability from year to year. There are particular things that happen in a given year that might, if we have multiple contracts being renegotiated, for example, but how are they tracking over time? The simplest to understand benchmark that we have, which is inflation, which is most easily looked at by the consumer price index. So I started working on a spreadsheet that would look at 20 years of data of the town's operating budget, other warrant trust funds, and then other warrant articles like road bonds or other particularly bonds, I guess, road bonds, facilities bonds. And Neil was kind enough to help me populate that 20 years of data. He's a superstar. And then, I plugged in CPI and some things and just started running some analysis, like what is the percent change year to year? How did that compare to a percent change in consumer price index? What's the running 3-year average? If you look at running 3-year average over the course of 20 years, because again, a year over year can sometimes be very misleading. But if you look at 3 years, it gives you a better pattern. And how does that again track our benchmark for inflation? So I did that, put a few simple charts together, simple. There's no like smoking guns, and I wasn't looking for one. I was more just looking to educate myself. And so when the question comes up, we can show, for example, the town, the budget over 20 years it is not wildly different from the CPI over 20 years, the operating budget. Although it's picked up the last few years, probably inflationary, probably for some other reasons. So anyway, I did it. I wanted to start with the town because although the town's not simple, it's simpler than the school. And before asking Michelle to do something that would take her some time, I thought it'd be good to show it to the budget committee, which you can't do, sorry. But we can look at it next. I can send it out, send it to Neil and have it distributed to you. You can poke around it. And then if we find it to be of value, we could we could ask the school to do likewise and then now that it's created, it's actually very easy to update each year. So that's the benefit of having it done. It took some work to actually get it done, but now that it's there, plugging the numbers each year. Again, if it's of use, I think it's of use, but honestly, I've just kind of started looking at all the data recently. It would be easy to update it. So that's the overview.
Thank you, I mean, for doing that. One thing that's thinking about it, is this, the state, let's say over the last, I don't know, 10 years or less, has stopped contributing to retirement.
Yeah.
And it's been a huge hit on, well, more on the schools, the town.
Yeah.
But it's been a big hit, and, can that or should that be reflected? To show that, yes, we take that out of it, we're closer to just inflation, so.
Yeah, you can look at that, I think, and I think we can look at that, Ken. So, I mean, the overall expense budget is the expense budget, so that affects more on the revenue and the tax rate than the overall expense budget. Because we were still paying for that, we just had a revenue source from the state to offset more of the expense. Now we have a smaller revenue source from the state to offset the expense. So I guess I would just say, like, it depends on whether you're looking at expenses or revenues, but the bottom line is we can look at that. If there are some major changes that happen, policy changes that throw, a spike or, this over a couple of years, we can try to explain that. Again, the idea is not to do any gotcha, it's just to have data to look at, and some of these you have to be able to interpret the data so that you can point out things to take it.
So I guess my think it's great. I do think that using the CPI as your indicator could be problematic in terms of its meaningfulness to compare the town and school budgets.
Yeah.
Because of the 8 buckets that are in CPI. So how do you tease out things that are in there, for instance, apparel? There's all these things that are in that basket of goods that don't apply to us. I thought about that, and there are other measures that are considered better than CPI. So the Federal Reserve doesn't use CPI in their prognostications. They use something called personal consumption expenditures, and I think they do trimmed means on that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's that's one of the questions that I had is that the best index or benchmark?
Yeah.
And so maybe we could follow up offline.
and
Just
tease
see
out
some other.
because there's ways to get at the categories within those that might give us
Better.
wages,
Fuel
healthcare,
groceries.
fuel, those kinds of things that we're purchasing, non-medication and housing. Stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, totally. Happy to look at that again, and that's exactly why I wanted to just build something, take a look at under the hood, see if it's useful and how we can make it more useful, and then.
You should probably be able to add the different indexes, even in the same chart, so you could look at,
Totally, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, you can have a CPI as a whole and then
Right.
do
Right.
those subset categories or look at other indices that are commonly used.
Well, one I'd be curious, because I hear seniors particularly is social security increase.
It's all a variation of like, what question are you trying to answer? If you're trying to answer, is the town operating budget going up relative to the stuff that the town buys? Then that's one question. If you're looking at how is it increasing versus seniors' ability to, yeah, affordability,
Right.
it's a different question.
For
But
wages,
still useful.
unemployment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think those are, so it's more designed to answer the former than how is it going up relative to ability to pay?
right.
But I think.
But
that's
now we
something
want to
that
know
we
all
could
of the things.
potentially look at,
Yeah.
right? And like Thomas was doing some of that
Right.
this last year on the budget.
Right.
And his spreadsheet skills are maybe a step or two beyond mine, but I think that could be worth looking at as well. So, Jonathan, okay to bring it back next.
Oh, I think definitely, yeah,
That's the intro.
I think it would be great to, we'll get the tech if you send it to Neil, so that it's up on the
Yeah.
Google Doc. So you can walk us through, where, you know, what you put together so far. I mean, unless anybody feels strongly in the other way, I think it would be really helpful to at least look,
Okay.
to contextualize and
Yeah.
something.
It's, I mean, that's my, it's just, it's some data and information that helps to give some, a longer term context to budget numbers that the committee is looking at in a given year.
I think also just, yeah, just looking straight year over year compared to itself. That there isn't some big spike or dip or whatever.
Yeah. And if there is, you know, there's usually an explanation that helps to unpack a lot.
Appreciate the work.
Would another one be, either the population of the town or the, enrollment of the schools? Those are the other potential driving factors.
Yeah, I mean, we can load those,
You could get
load things
more and
like
more
that in,
complex.
it's just, yeah. I did look at, one thing we did plug in was the town, the valuation. Because of course, that's, you know, that's what drives tax rate. Nay. There have been, you know, different.
Wait till
That
this
has
time.
changed, yeah, it's gonna go way up. Our next full assessment, which is when? This year?
Next year.
Yeah. It's gonna lower the tax rate, but not lower taxes.
Other discussion on this at this point, or before we table this? We can table this. So we'll move on to public comment. Open it to the public.
Good evening, Lauren Clement.
Just give your,
86 Maple Street. A couple things, to Kristen's point on CIP. As you know, in the CIP, there's allocated funds annually that are gonna increase over the course of the 7 years. Last year we put in 200,000 for the warrant article. And when you're following the CIP, some of these projected prices on items came in higher than were anticipated. So that does change the dynamics of that whole 7-year plan. And that, I think, is kind of what you were digging at. And I think that's helpful information for you guys to understand that it does step up over the course of the 7 years, I think up to 350,000, asking the town to put a warrant article. I don't know how that works. If 1 year, say year 3, town votes it down, it's gonna throw the whole projection on, but that's so we don't have to deal with a big bond. But to your point, I think that was I think it's pertinent at budget committee. On the lead, I spoke to Jim about that, and something that made me feel a little more relieved was he said that the state changed their standards of parts per million requirements, and they came in the same numbers as they had in previous years. The state just had more stringent numbers, and that's why that flagged up. And I didn't catch that on the notifications, but it still send up alarms on certain stuff. But that was a little more comforting that it wasn't something new that's leaching out or developing. If that same numbers were in the previous year, we would have passed, but the standards got more stringent.
Except for one that's like 1,000, right? That probably would have been pink regardless.
I guess I missed that one. Sorry. Okay, I missed that one.
Is this like a water fountain or something?
No, it's
None of the water fountains. It was
Okay.
more in the kitchens, and there was one in a boiler room or something that never gets, we wouldn't have any access to it. That, you know, so they have notes on them. In regards to the housing situation, which was discussed the other night, there's 2 separate things. The housing committee is a new committee that's just getting underway. There are meetings coming up, and they're gathering information from the community and not putting in forward any recommendations. That's my understanding. However, the planning board has zoning changes that at Tuesday's meeting coming up, there's public hearing, and they're going to run 3 of those and hopefully vote on some changes to some TIFs. And I believe that's at exit 6, Hart's Corner, which is 202 and 9, Burnham Intervale, and the old paper mill site in West Hop for workforce housing and such. And I personally, I think it's a lot for the town to take on, not only on the school side, but it could also put a strain on fire and police and all that too. So they're looking for public input on that.
And it's this,
Tuesday at planning board here is the first of the public hearing, I believe. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is on year end with the school budget, because I've been trying to spend 2.5 years or so trying to understand the budget cycles. There's a lot to it. And it seems, I wish there was a 1-page year end analysis, like a 1 sheet. At the end of, towards the end of the year, the budget went on a freeze. And then it seemed at the end of the year, there was approximately about $68,000 spent, which isn't a lot out of the $25 million budget, but on things that weren't allocated or requested at the beginning of the year, there were blinds and stuff that the curriculum department needed. So to me, that was extra money on top of the budget. I'm still confused about our Article 10. They requested $400,000 to meet the needs of the budget. And I believe, if I'm not understanding correctly, all of that was returned. Not so to me, that's an extra $400,000 that was unused or not needed. So that's $468,000. The budget, the school is returning $198,000 as revenue to this year's operating budget. That's another $200,000. And we also pumped $75,000 and $75,000 staggered over 2 years into the lunch fund. And my understanding is they could only retain so much of that, and they needed to discuss spending that down. I don't know if that's on kitchen equipment and whatnot, but they can only hold on to so much. So I know that's a separate line item, but if you add that in, we're getting up there on missing the mark quite a bit, and returning $200,000 to this year's operating budget doesn't reduce the operating budget by $200,000. In fact, it adds an additional $200,000. If you didn't need $200,000 from last year and you're adding $200,000, we're $400,000 up. We also had $400,000 that we didn't use. That's great. It's still sitting in the coffers, but it seems like we missed the mark here quite a bit. And I just wanted to note that, and it'd be interesting to see a page that just laid that all out. I'm not arguing the $68,000 that was spent. It was all on useful stuff, but it just seems like when the work sessions happen, which we're going to happen next Tuesday, all the important needs come forth to the school board, and then they pick and choose what's most important. So when there's extras on there to spend down a bloated budget, if that's what you want to call it, to bring it down, those should be noted as part of the overall year's expenditure. So anyhow, that's my thoughts on the full circle of the operating budget with the school. So those are my points. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else on Zoom?
Says 2 participants.
No, it's just us.
That's Rich.
That means caps.
Yeah. So seeing no other members of the public here. I appreciate the comments. Gonna close public comment and move to any other business.
Yes, I don't know if this is the appropriate time to do other business, but I do want to make a point of clarification on $200,000 for
Of course.
the state.
Yeah,
So that in revenues, we're reducing tax rate, it is not increasing our budget at all. It's just $200,000 more in revenue that we have that we don't need to, we're reducing tax rate, or the tax rate will be 26 cents, the last thing we have projected in March. So not an increase in our budget, it's an increase in revenue and a decrease in tax
always good.
rate.
What was the source of it?
The state changed the adequacy formulas, and that's what that.
Any other business, Mark?
Can you remind me, I don't know if we talked about this last meeting, of what our December and January budget committee schedule is?
What if I knew it? I don't.
Ken told me we have a meeting on the 6th.
You're talking December,
Or
Wednesday, December 6th is town budget presentation. December 13th will be the town budget follow-up.
okay.
And I do not have the.
Number 6, you said, Ken?
6 and 11.
And we have a regularly scheduled meeting January 10th. So ideally, the school would present. I think that, right? I think it's typically, it just takes the school a bit longer.
Right.
I mean, the precincts have to be in there somewhere.
Yeah. Those are preferred. Yeah. Okay. Well, as long as we know through December, that's probably good for now. 6th and the 13th. Ask somebody else, Jonathan,
What's it? Yeah, of course.
if we're good on this.
Wait, just, can you give me those dates again? Well,
The Wednesday, December 6th,
6,
and Wednesday, December 13th.
13.
Rich has raised his hand.
Oh. Rich, I think Rich?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I couldn't unmute myself because I had to go out and then come back in and I was unable to unmute myself. So I just wanted to be unmuted. That's all.
Excellent.
You are unmuted.
Thank you.
So 12/6, 12/13, and our next one is November, whatever. Somebody probably knows that. November.
I believe, in November 8th, Wednesday, November 8th, next schedule.
Yeah.
Budget committee.
Okay. Mark, did you say you had other business?
I do. I was curious, so in the minutes, it was alluded to tonight, there was discussion last meeting about the role of the budget committee. And then possibly a presentation by the municipal association or something else. I'm just curious. Is there more discussion to have there? Other than Rob telling us what we want to talk about?
I mean, so last time we had said, so when we closed last year, budget committee, we had said, there was like, we had all kind of said, maybe we should talk about the role of the budget committee. So in the last meeting, because the two of you were missing, I said, let's not do it this meeting without our chair. But that we should maybe talk about whether we want to talk about it.
And indeed, there were 3 documents downloaded. Well,
Yes.
specifically about the role of the budget.
And then I think Neil had said that there could be a presentation if we were interested in that about the role of the budget committee.
That would be an individual from the municipal association. I guess the thing is, at this point, where our next meeting is November 8th, we could, get that presentation then. But shortly thereafter, I assume we're, actually be starting some of the budget presentations.
Right. The short window.
Well, one of the documents just happens to be a summary by the New Hampshire Municipal Association.
Mhm.
For all of the budget. Yeah, it's pretty, if you read it, it's pretty straightforward. Not sure that we would require any kind of real presentation.
I agree with you, because if it was offered.
People have other thoughts about this?
I mean, having read all three documents, they repeat each other a lot and cite each other, and it seems as though if you read the real RSA, we have a pretty wide berth as to what we're allowed to ask for. And, I understand that these meetings cannot go on for 12 hours at a time. But it's pretty clear here, indulge me for a moment. 3216 Roman numeral 2. Confer, this is what we're supposed to do, the duties. Confer with the governing body or bodies and with other officers, department heads, which came up at the end of last year, and other officials relative to estimated costs, revenues, and services performed to the extent deemed necessary by the budget committee.
And that is after the town or the school presents its budget.
Okay,
And which is something that we have offered all along. I
Right.
don't think there's anything that consists that there. And I believe the school has done the same.
absolutely. It's just hard to justify saying that's not the role of the budget committee when it lists costs, revenues, and services.
Who was saying it's?
It's the RSA.
Who is saying that the budget committee has been told no to something that is in the RSA? And I think you're leading to, you're saying that we've done something wrong in the past.
I think we've had a lot of discussions that end with that's not the role of the budget committee. I'm not the only person who remembers that.
I don't think once the budget is provided that you've ever been told, no, we can't bring in the head of DPW to answer questions.
No,
But you
no.
can't before we put the budget together.
So to clarify, that's one thing we cannot do. We can confer with department heads, but interestingly enough, cannot require them to attend a budget committee. Which is kind of a duality there on the RSA.
I think once the budget is presented, you can request the department head to come to a budget committee.
I'm sure you can request them, but the way the laws are written, you do not have to appeal. Again, having read,
Well,
the documents are pretty clear. There's the RSA, which the average person, on RSA is kind of RSA language, and then there's a whole breakdown on what the law actually means. And then, of course, in New Hampshire, we actually have a municipal association, like most states, and then they jumped in and they summarize what their understanding of the RSA was. That's the three documents in different level of detail.
So it's been a few months since I read those, so I'm a little foggy on it, but I'll just use an example from last year that I think in this setting, there was discussion / debate about what would be a reasonable class size. And costs, how we could save money if class size was 30. And there was all kinds of discussion about what that number could and should be. To me, that is not the role of the budget. That is the role of the school. So we dictate, decide what best educational practice is and what those class sizes should be. The budget committee can certainly then comment on the cost of salaries, etc. That's fine. But I don't think it's appropriate for the budget committee to be entertaining the educational questions during budget committee session. Or decisions that the superintendent is going to make in his job of running the schools.
I actually disagree because the outcome of that conversation was a discovery that there actually was no policy set by the school board on what an appropriate class size is. And the outcome of that was that the school board took it upon itself and did that had a process to determine that, and now we have it. And so going forward, if parents come up to the budget committee, which they did last year, to say, please don't take away my 4th grade class teacher, then we can appropriately say, we are not determining class size. The school board has reviewed this. And so I would argue that anytime a parent is sitting in front of us on any issue, because we are funding or not funding something, or recommending funding or not funding something, it is appropriate for the budget committee to discuss it and determine, I think as we did, like our outcome of that was, we would recommend that the school board take this up, which then they did. I think that was actually a healthy outcome for the town.
I don't think the budget committee meeting was the antecedent to us having the knowledge that that policy was not what it should be. I think they sort of, I don't remember the timelines, but you know, we have a policy committee that studies those things, and we were exploring that, but we didn't think the best time to do it was in the heat of the budget process where people get emotional. But the best time to have that conversation was when we're not going to be emotional, because if, you know, for 20 some odd years, people would go to the floor of school district meeting and get very emotional about adding teachers or subtracting teachers because of the impact on their son or daughter. I mean, that happened many, many times. So to have that conversation at that point in time, it would seem like the best, like clear heads would prevail, right? It would become very.
Excuse me, could I ask Rob to get closer to the microphone? I think he must be leaning back or very
I
quiet.
am back. Sorry, Rich.
And those ones are not, it's only discs.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I just, can I add? So I guess, Rob, I have a pretty different recollection of the conversation last year. I mean, I don't want to say it's a blanket statement, but we as a budget committee, we're not having a policy discussion about what class sizes should be. I mean, it's not that there might have not been an opinion. We were talking about a difference, essentially a requested reduction in the school budget, which was then presented to us as this is going to result in the loss of a 4th grade class. And then we were asking, what is the impact of that? And so it inevitably came up what the class sizes were going to be. The public talked a lot about class size. We were talking about what was a proposed reduction, and that was the reason it came up in the meeting was because that was a position that was put forward. So I guess I would just say we were focused on the budget and managing the budget. I do not think we were focused on what the appropriate class sizes should be. That wasn't the conversation amongst the committee. Of course, parents came in and made their points about that. But I do think it's in our purview. We're talking about what is the implication of the budget to say. And it's put forward by the school. This is if we reduce it, like we gotta be able to talk about that implication, but I agree with you that like my opinion about class sizes as a budget committee member, that's not the role of the budget committee, what the right class size should be. So I agree with you, but I don't recall the conversation the same that we were presented.
Right, so. Second night and not making friends, but that's okay. So I guess what I would say is, as I listened to that conversation in public comment, that perhaps I would have redirected some of that public comment to a school board meeting, instead of allowing it to continue to go on as though it was a forum that would be very, very appropriate for a school board meeting, but I did not think was appropriate for a budget committee. Because I agree with you, it's completely within your purview to do that. But then through the public comment process, there was something else going on that I thought would be much more appropriate for a school board. So that's why my view is there. So I was taking the totality, not just what was happening at this table, but what's happening in the meeting itself.
I guess my question would be, I agree fully, it's not our role to set policy, but since we are concerned with budget, and is it not our role to ask possibly what that policy would cost, what changes it would make on the budget. Because when the policies are set, well, then we're presented with just a budget. Whereas working through it, if we aren't able to interject at certain points and say, well, maybe this is gonna go over too much. I don't see how we're going to, work towards a fiscally responsible budget if we don't have a say in some of the things coming out.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of two worlds, right? So if we're going to have a policy and we talk about cost impact, we talk about that at our school board meetings. And then the outcome of that results in what you see in our budget. So you can, I guess you can agree or disagree as a budget committee, but it doesn't. Sometimes it comes off as the budget committee, I'm articulating this poorly.
Yeah.
Is creating school policy or impacting school policy, and that's not the way it's here. I see the role of the budget committee as saying, we understand what you did with this budget, we understand its significance within the construct of what the town has said, this is what we want our schools to look like, right? That's what we do as a budget, as a school board. But I guess there's just some gray lines that occur. And I just am asking that we be aware of those gray lines. And I don't mean to be rude, but I really think the lines of who's doing what should be a lot clearer.
I mean, I guess, first of all, when you say you're asking, I mean, I assume you mean you, Rob, not you, the school board, right? You're not speaking, it's not like the school board has sent you here to deliver this message, right?
No, I'm speaking
Just so we're
in my
clear,
role as a
right.
budget committee person.
Totally fair.
Right.
The second thing I think,
By the way.
the second thing that I think I would say is, in order for us to decide to understand the budget and decide whether or not we support that budget, that kind of, implicit in that is understanding what's being spent and why it's being spent, right? So it isn't necessarily saying this curriculum should change or this textbook is better than that textbook. But it's also not just saying, okay, I understand the number and I'm up or down on that number. Like there has to be some kind of context. We need to understand it a little bit because otherwise we wouldn't have a function. So, I mean, this is just my view.
Right.
I also think that a broader point that I would make is that, we all serve the town. We're all elected to represent the taxpayers. And I think that, it's good to have discussion about how the sausage is made, and it could be in multiple forums, and it could be with multiple viewpoints. And I think that that helps people, the taxpayers, understand where their taxes are going. So my view is that it isn't appropriate to have somebody come to our meeting and ask a question about the budget, which we're discussing, and for us to say, you should go to the school board. I think it's appropriate for us to understand what a taxpayer is asking as best we can, have conversation about that, and continue to work collaboratively toward making the taxpayers feel like their voice is being heard and they're being represented by all of us. That's my view on this.
I wouldn't disagree with that. Right? I don't disagree with any of what you just said. I guess, again, I will go back to sometimes it's difficult because the impact of the budget can create policy, and that is not necessarily, that's not the role of the budget committee, to create school policy and to determine how superintendent executes his budget.
Can you give an example of when that happened in a negative way in recent years?
No, off the top of my head.
Steve, you had your.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably most of us agree that we don't want to dictate class size or curriculum any more than we want to dictate to the fire chief what the next fire truck is that they're purchasing, or to the police chief what radios or sidearms to equip their officers with. But I also think that most of us can agree that if we decide to vote tonight that we're not gonna support a town budget that comes back 2% over CPI or whatever term that you use, that is definitely the role of the budget. And I think that's the discussion that we're trying to have.
And when you do that, it's helpful to understand from the board, the administration, what might the impacts of that be?
So that's what I've been
I
struggling,
think-
that's what I've been
you know,
struggling with,
it's-
Mark.
It will be helpful, if, like, we could get a presentation from the municipal association, and it's gonna be pretty high level. Because there is so much up to, there is gray area and there's interpretation, and so like, to me. This can be a healthy discussion, this isn't, I don't feel like this is a contentious discussion in my mind. I think this healthy discussion, and reasonably people can sometimes have disagreements about what is or isn't on what side of the line. And I think it'll be helpful just as issues come up, you know, if somebody thinks something's outside the bounds of the budget committee, we'll talk about it. If others disagree, we'll talk about it. If you think something happening here is going to dictate state policy, like, I don't understand that, but I certainly would want to know if you feel like that's happening. So we're probably gonna have to ground it in reality, on real issues and real topics as we're going forward.
So,
May-
go ahead, Mr. Houston.
I'm sorry. May I ask a question of Rob that I was not able to ask before because I was at work?
Sure.
I work with a young student here at the farm, and he said that the French program is getting quite thin on students, and the capstone class only has 6 students in it, which is I believe he said a combination of the level 4 class and the level 5 French class. And I was just wondering how low that number would need to get before capstone class would be canceled due to lack of attendance.
Right, so if in the program of studies, it says there's a 4-5 class, then there's a 4-5 class. That is the conversation that we've been having for the last couple of years. That we run courses because it's part of our program of studies, and we believe that it's what students need for whatever ambitions or tracks they're going down. So I don't know if there is a number or that would get to the point where that would be canceled. I'm not sure.
I guess, could you ask the school board for our next meeting, like if it got down to 1, would you cancel the class? Is there some number that is uneconomical to run that class at?
Yeah, I will explore that for you, Rich.
Thank you, sir.
But you have, it sounds like there is I don't know if this is a policy, or, you know, that basically you have a program of studies, and it's irrespective in any given year, at least, of how many students sign up for the class. And so, I mean, I think about it, Rich, more as like, if a particular program area has a long-term, you know, a pattern of diminishment of student interest, I would imagine the administration would revisit that.
This question around, and this does relate to the budget, is there were Rob Nato had history Hopkinton High School. Courses were not allowed to run if they fell below a certain number. Some years it was 12, some years it was 10. Those are generally the 2 numbers. However, given the nature of our school, if your son or daughter is in a class with 80 kids, and your other son or daughter is in a different grade with 60 kids, well, it doesn't take a lot to figure out probability that that course may not run just because there are fewer students. And part of what Steve, when he was leaving, and Mr. Flynn, when he came in, was that we were going to run a program of studies and get away from that idea of having a low number set the pace and create, I see it as an equity issue for all students. It shouldn't matter whether your class is 60 kids or 80 kids. If French is something you're going to explore, or whatever course it might be, then that course should run. And I don't think we would get to the point of 1. I just think that's an example.
So I do think Mark's point is well taken in that in my own mind, it's like, how productive is it to sort of try to answer the like epistemological question of what the budget committee is, as opposed to looking at specific issues related to the budget in front of us, which I think will probably be more useful. And I do think that everybody on the budget committee and the school board and the select board are all trying to do what's best for the town and for the students, and so I think it's healthy to have discourse. I think that's a good thing. But I guess the question is, do we want more? Do we want to try to flesh this out more, or just kind of see how things progress? I guess the question is whether it's, because that was the original question, right? Was the role of the budget committee to try to define that in some way.
My preference would be to do it as it comes up. But to go into this, knowing that like this is a healthy conversation.
Yeah.
We can have respectful differences of opinion on certain areas. I've certainly seen that. I mean, this is my 8th year on the budget committee now. Can't even like 170 years. Yeah. And so this too. I mean, the budget committee, when I came on it, I think was trying to be much more granular, and I think has stepped back from that. And individual committee members have an interest in becoming more granular. So this committee, I think, and how it's operated has changed over time. And it's just a good healthy conversation. We might have to refer on an issue if we're really in disagreement to the RSA or the Municipal Association guidance. We can do that.
I'm not sure if the municipal association guidance might be different than the guidance from the school association. As I read the municipal association, what it says, that first of all, officers' departments submit statements of estimated expenses and receipts to the governing body, which would be the select board. Then the governing body submits its recommendations to the budget committee, together with all information necessary for preparation of the annual budget. Then RSA 3216 and 3217 make it clear that the budget committee is the authority to request information from the department heads and other officials. So I think the information directly is where we get hung up. On whether it would be another class or whatever. But that's during the presentation by the school board budget.
Yeah, and some of it, I guess, relates to what the public wants to talk about. We had a lot of members of the public, and I think your observation about what came up. I kind of am in the same campus. I think the way you described it, Jonathan, because I was chairing the meeting. I'm so happy when members of the public come out, and I want to give them the time to share their views. And I felt it's just interesting to hear your perspective. Like, it makes me think, like, you can redirect and say, this isn't the appropriate form. We should take that to the school board. It's a judgment call. And so really making that judgment this year, I tend to think it's hearing what's on the public's mind as it relates to the budget. I found it helpful. And some of it definitely strayed into areas that are probably outside of our purview or more appropriate in the school board.
Yes, think of a couple. But I also think that, whatever it is that informs us to make our decisions is helpful. Other discussion on this issue right now from anybody?
Yeah, I think kind of what raised some of this was at the end of the budget process last year. I mean, I think we all want to do a good job on the budget committee. Unfortunately, right now, I do not have time to review the minutes of every select board meeting every school board meeting, and every sub-department, and go to the new meetings on the housing committee. So I think what I would suggest, you know, if we are gonna take a more granular approach to the budget, then is there some way to split the load? Do we have one or two volunteers to tackle the school, a volunteer to tackle the dump, a volunteer to tackle the transfer station, a volunteer to tackle the road department, as far as like learning a little bit more about the different departments? And then that way, when we come back, some of the questions that we have somebody right on our own committee that can say, you know, I did listen to that school board meeting. And here's my take on it. That's kind of, I think, what prompted the discussion at the end of the last budget.
Yeah, I think you specifically said could meet with the department heads. And that
Yes.
that triggered a hotly contested debate.
If I picked the dump as my area of expertise, because obviously there's some issues, at the transfer station, then certainly I would want to visit the transfer station and talk to the people. And again, it has to be with the permission of the budget committee, but it's certainly within the purview of the budget committee to do that. I think after reviewing these documents, there's no real question.
I don't think there's, until the budget is presented to this committee, then you could do that. If that was like. what the
Maybe
budget
we
committee-
should have the meeting, because that's not my understanding. Maybe we should have somebody come.
I think it would be good. I think it would be good to have a third party come and say, you know, this is the role. It would be helpful to me beyond being an RSA where people could articulate the level of question, response. I mean, look, Rob being Rob, I want to give you guys as much information as you need. I want to explain it as best I can. You know, we don't have anything that we don't. I just don't want the budget committee to become a mini school board meeting with me as the only member present. That's what I don't want. I don't think that, and I'm assuming that's what other people who, you know, sat in my chair previously sometimes felt, that it was a mini school board. And that I don't think is appropriate, but where is that line? It's tricky because, yeah, you want to know, we've got a new facilities director and he's doing great things. So what's the budgetary impact? Bringing in lots of grants, great, that has a budgetary impact. The CIP and how that's being rolled out and how it's forecasting and how we're setting aside money for that has a budgetary impact. What's in the CIP? That's not to me, right? And now that goes back to the school board. You decide what's in the CIP. Superintendent, facilities directing the people on that committee, not the budget committee deciding what's in the CIP. That's where it's just, you know, get into conversations about why that is. And
So it seems like you would be shooting yourself in the foot, not giving us information, right? Because then if all we have is a big number and people are telling us, and I know you give us tons of information, but just in theory, we have a big number, $26 million or whatever. And we've got tons of people coming in saying, I can't afford to live in this town. My dad can't afford to live in this town. And if all I have is a big number, it's much easier to just say, well, let's just cut 10% off of this big number. It's when you tell us it's a fourth grade teacher, when we get into the nitty gritty, that you actually explain the need for the money. If it's just high level stuff, it's much easier to say no. Right?
but that's not what I just said.
No, but what I'm saying is like getting into the details of what's on the CIP. And I agree with you that we would not be able to change the CIP.
Right.
But having the boiler in my head instead of just $200,000 in my head makes it more likely that I'm going to acquiesce to your budget request, right?
I think that's what I just said. We're happy to explain that, but what it is and which boiler and why that, and that's the facilities director's job. That's the superintendent's job.
Absolutely.
We have a few different things we're talking about right now. We've got Steve's suggestion that everybody divvy up and become an expert on a particular aspect of the budgets. We have a request or discussion of whether we would bring this municipal budget committee in to advise us, because it wouldn't be binding. The statute is a statute. They can come in and tell us what they think, but that doesn't necessarily tell us we can or can't ask a question. So if people want them to come in, they can come in and talk to us if we think it'll help us. But I'm not actually hearing a lot of difference, with one exception on this committee, as to what the role of the budget committee is. I'm hearing everybody else basically saying, this is what we want to know in order for us to do our job. So this is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So if we ask a question and you tell us, well, the school board doesn't want to tell you that, then I guess we'll burn that bridge when we come to it. But I'm not seeing that in front of us right now. Like, to me, this is a hypothetical conflict that doesn't exist. So it doesn't, to me, make a lot of sense right now to spend a lot of energy sort of hashing out this hypothetical conflict which doesn't exist. This is just my take on this.
I kind of agree. I feel like there's some like historical baggage here as well. That's coming to the forefront that we might find out in the next couple of meetings that we don't actually disagree that much on the role. But
Right, because you don't really even have the budget yet. So we're not even really discussing the budget. We're just discussing how we're gonna discuss the budget that isn't in front of us. But to me, this just doesn't feel, going back to your point, Steve, I mean, it might be helpful. I personally am not super enthusiastic about signing up to become an expert on the transfer station, but could it be helpful? It could be. My own opinion, if everybody else feels differently, I would bow to the will of the majority, but I try to go to the meetings that I think are going to be important, review the notes that I try to, and take in the information that we get as a committee. That's my take, because I know you brought this up at the end of last and have brought it up again. And I think it's a valid thing to discuss, but I don't want us to get sidetracked and not address what you're saying also. Because I don't think we totally have addressed that one.
Just on Steve, on your suggestion, I'll say, I mean, I think if someone is interested, really leaning in on one facet of something that was going to come to the budget committee, like raise your hand and go ahead, that would be great.
It would be helpful information to have.
Whether it's as a whole or as a whole or a facet of it. Is willing to go to the meetings and potentially have a conversation with department appropriate staff at the appropriate time. I wouldn't sign up for that myself because I've always felt like my budget committee is like, we should be able to get the information on the budget committee that we need during the budget committee meetings and with the materials provided to the budget committee, and that the ask of being on the budget committee is not to go to a bunch of school board meetings or select board meetings. That you should be able to do your job on the budget committee by participating in a budget committee meeting, same materials. That's my view on it, so I probably would sign up. But I think if somebody wants to, like, awesome, that'd be great. I'm sure it'd be very helpful.
I will say I have rarely gone to a school board meeting and not seen Debbie and Don there. Almost every time I show up, I see Debbie and Don.
God bless you.
I think there are like hot button issues that could come up, like just off the top of my head, ones that like might be or not be worth assigning somebody, but it'd be nice if somebody like volunteered sort of to learn a little bit more, is like the
sludge
remediation. Vicky has kind of been our resident accepted.
Thank you, Vicky.
And then I'm like, housing committee and possible dense family units might be like it has the potential to be a hot button community issue, at least. Like, it'd be worthwhile possibly for one of us to pay a little bit more attention to that issue. I think that's slightly where you were going, or maybe a middle ground towards that.
Sure.
I will volunteer as tribute for the housing one.
I don't know if I agree that may have an impact down the road. But as far as the budget for 2024, I don't see it as having any impact. But I as a citizen, we should certainly you know, find out, follow it, why you're input in, whatever. As far as the, you know, again, I'm just talking the select board, particular issues where transfer station has come up on November 12th. We're having budget presentations on it. We're gonna have Dan or whomever, provide his budget requests. He's gonna be asked questions. Public's gonna be asked. So I don't know if it's overkill going beyond that.
That's helpful.
Yeah. And same with the school board, if you know that there's a particular school board meeting coming up that you think, well, geez, based on the conversations I'm having with the budget committee, if this is gonna be educational, if you flag that, that would be helpful. I'm sure people would go. I would.
To go back to, whoever this person might be to come and talk about the role of the committee. On the school board, there are trainings that happen when you go on a school board association sponsors. Webinars, we've had people come, this is the role, these are the, the third rail that you need to avoid, proper behavior protocol, and it's very, very helpful. It's not just a rereading of RSA, it's the what ifs and can do's of your role. And that's been very, very helpful to any school board member, certainly to me in the last 3+ years. So I don't know what that presentation would look like. Whomever, for this particular.
I think if there are committee members who think it would be helpful and we can get, like, I'm certainly fine with that. Probably learn something. You can get somebody here. It's like the gift, but if committee members would be helpful, and I'm in support of committee members who feel like that would be useful.
Other thoughts?
I don't think it's. I support either way. I think we can move through, like I've heard people say, as the need arises. But I also think any knowledge is important and we can utilize it, sure. I'm just not sure asking some of the questions that I'm hearing tonight, i.e. just trying to learn why something has been added to the budget and how that's going to affect the budget. Is that our role and is it not? I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to answer that. Because to me, that's really, I know that's my main concern. I don't want to just do an up or down. That it's got to be based on knowledge of the situation and why we're going.
And I don't disagree that is the role, explaining to you what's in our budget, why it's in our budget, how we came to that conclusion.
Who, Steve, did you get the municipal, are you the one that came up with these?
I had originally sent Neil that article and then this goes back to us. April, whenever we wrapped up, and then he went and found these other ones and said that he had already flagged that article and was going to provide those to the budget committee.
Do you wanna reach out to this NHMA?
Yeah, I
See if they give a presentation on how to budget committee?
I'll consult with Neil on that because it sounds like something that he had already anticipated.
Yeah, either or.
Yeah, I think it would be better probably to have Neil.
And then we could at least know what we're talking about, like if there is such a thing and what it looks like. So maybe we could table this conversation until we have something in front of us.
They do workshops.
Yeah, yes. If we table it, then we're into our budget,
Right, but we're gonna be either way. I mean, well, I don't even know what I would vote for right now, except whether we have interest in it. Like, we don't even know what it is.
So what do you want? Maybe I'm not understanding. What do you
Like,
want?
do they have a presentation that they can come and give us? Is it
I was under the impression from Neil that they do.
okay?
Because they do workshops.
Yeah.
It's a full day workshop, I know.
What we do as a school board is not part of a school board meeting, it is a training.
Mhm. I mean,
Call for the vote, Jonathan,
the vote on what?
if we should invite the municipal association.
Sure. Someone wanna make a motion? Steve, you wanna make a motion?
Personally, I think the documents are clear, crystal clear.
I don't disagree, and I'm agnostic to this, so.
Right, but I'll even make a motion, so if you want to take a vote on it, a motion that the budget committee ask our town administrator to invite the municipal association to give us a presentation on the role of budget committees.
That's fair. Second. Discussion? And we have to do an individual vote here, right? What?
Mr. Nato.
Behind the post. You get obstruction seats.
Man in jeans.
Steve?
Again, I would vote no. But it was stated.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Yes. No.
I don't know, yeah,
What about no?
Yes.
You're-
Yes.
Yes.
All right. I think that carries it, so.
Rich got 2 votes.
I wasn't sure if you heard me because my phone is glitching.
Rich, you have us cowed. All right. So the yeses have it. So, we'll wait to hear back what Neil's got to say. Any other business?
Are you suggesting that we should do this separate from a scheduled public budget committee meeting?
I think we'll find out what they have to, how they do it. I mean. Not to answer for you, but, any other business? No? That brings us to a motion to adjourn, I think.
So moved.
Somebody moved and somebody seconded.
second.
We have to individually vote.
Really?
I don't know. I do what Ken tells me.
Usually by that time you say, okay, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
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 Rich, you want to vote?
Yes.
He hung up already.
It's
With his-
glitching. I'm sorry.
Rich voted with his feet. All right. An exciting start to this budgetary season.
Good night. Thank you all.
Thanks, Rich. Like all
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Kelly, do you want to try to clear this out tonight or wait leave it tomorrow?
Oh, no, I'll take care of it.
Thank you, Debbie.
thanks you guys.
Thanks, Ken. Where do we take them? Just leave it.
Yes. I mean, sort of. Really?
Oh, Lauren. you're-
Yeah, I mean, I put that there.
Thank you, we're getting there.
We should stop recording.